also rolled out. How far and how well did all these fare? Are there lessons for the generations of survivors of the war? And did war present any opportunities to do things differently? This is the Eastern Eye. I am Alex Obodo. Welcome to the Eastern Eye here on Afia TV. It's a program that X-rays the political, social, and economic developments around us. Joining me tonight to share some perspectives on the lessons and what could have been done differently after the war is Chief Kalu Onuma. He's a historian, psychologist, and cultural curator. Thank you so much, Chief Onuma, for joining me tonight on the Eastern Eye.
Obodo, thank you for having me. Good evening, everybody.
All right. So I guess the first question would be, with everything that has happened in Nigeria, the war obviously is Nigeria's biggest event. There's no other way to talk about Nigeria without mentioning those 3 dark years, 1967 to 1970. Though a lot of argument to be on, well, it happened mostly on the eastern flanks, but it changed Nigeria's trajectory. Do you think that Nigeria has managed to drive back onto the road? Because the war obviously may have truncated her journey. Do you think Nigeria has driven herself back onto that road to recovery?
Well, that's a good question and a very good place to start. Thank you, Obodo, once again. It was quite interesting having that conversation with you in Enugu. Well, let me say that the Nigerian Biafran Civil War is one of those defining moments for our country, which we have not really been able to come to terms with. The struggle for independence was the first of the many flag posts Nigeria had. Then the independence itself, then the coup, and then the counter coup, and then the civil war. So when you take all these together, you could see that at no time have we paused as a nation to take stock of all these happenings in our collective history. And that is why probably it continues to be a serious point of conflict and disagreement, and at some point of bloodshed. But it shouldn't be. Now, concerning your question and the well-romanticized 3R, it was a good speech, it was a good gesture. It saved a lot of lives on both sides. It saved us from descending to total and complete anarchy. But beyond that speech and beyond that gesture and beyond what happened, the country haven't done enough, moved on enough to be able to understand the underlying reasons why in a very short space, in less than 10 years, we found ourselves in arms against one another. We forgot the famous lines of our national anthem then, and we saw each other from 2 different divides. Now, our conversation today is really not about what happened during the war, even though from time to time we'll be talking about that. The conversation today is about whether we've been really able to heal, whether we've been able to reunify ourselves as a country, whether we were able to rehabilitate those whose lives were torn apart, whose communities were devastated, and whether we've been able to reconstruct. I don't just mean the physical reconstructions, but the mental reconstruction, the psychological decay and destruction that we inflicted on one another. So the big question you asked, 55 years after, have we really been able to do that? Depending on what side of the telescope you'll be looking at, or depending on what side of the divide you'll be looking at. But irrespective of what part, the fact that the truth of the matter is that a lot are still left undone.
All right.
If we are here today discussing this, means we've taken a first step.
That's right.
More could still be done.
Okay. Let's get to the 3 R's. And because you are also a psychologist, let's start from the rehabilitation part. Because a lot of people seem to struggle getting over what happened either to them or to their family members during the war. Some people haven't quite. In fact, there was a documentary aired on this channel yesterday, and someone was relaying an information as to what happened to one guy he used to know, but by 1970, when he returned, he couldn't recognize him because he seemed to have lost all real consciousness of a person he used to know. What he saw was a shell of a man who may have lost everything in terms of holding on to life, that he was merely just there, but not present, as it were. Do you think it is possible that there are people scattered all over eastern Nigeria and probably in other parts of the country and even abroad who are still bearing the scars of the Civil War, and it has affected their psyche in a way that they haven't lived a normal life since 1970, the war ended?
The answer is yes. War is a terrible thing. And for everybody listening to me, it doesn't matter how old you are. If you were born in 1970, you're 55 years. If you were born in 1969, you're 56 years. If you were born 68, you're 57 years. So that gives you a sense of how old and how deep that scare could be. So for those who are younger and for those whose only experience about the war could be the late night stories between your parents or your family or your uncles, or something you've read, or something you've imagined, or something you've been told, irrespective of how old you are, the pain is very deep. So one of the first things that we should mark in this conversation is that for no reason must we ever find ourselves in a situation where we have to pick up arms to defend ourselves. Because if after 55 years of the end of the war, we've still not been able to move beyond the pains, the destructions, the marginalization, and the hurt, then you could now imagine the scale of mental destruction that those who saw the war, who saw blood, and who lived through it, that they had to bear. When you take the narrative of the people that went to the war and match it with the narrative of the younger generation, in other words, the children of the war that were born after the war, their pain is almost the same. The hurt is always almost the same. Then the question you asked, have we truly been able to be rehabilitated mentally and psychologically? If you look at what is going on across the eastern region of Nigeria, I am now including the present-day Southeast and all the South-South that witnessed and saw the war, you would see that the mental state they go into when these conversations come up is quite different from the mental state of those who don't come from this region. So one of the things that we should really be able to look at now is not what it has done to us, because it did quite a lot to us. I would see, growing up then, I saw uncles who witnessed the war sit down, and they continue, for those of them who are still alive today, completely lost in limbo. And their connection with the realities around them becomes very blurred. And this has now been transferred to a generation that knew nothing about the reasons why we went to the war, and they're equally suffering. Just take for an example, all you need to do in Abuja or in Lagos or in any of the key cities of Nigeria outside the Southeast is to mention your name. And then suddenly there's a whole lot of silence and there's a whole lot of treatment. So we are not just battling the internal devils and demons that we carry around of the sufferings that we went through. We are equally carrying the burden of the treatment that is given to a leper. When a leper walks in somewhere, everybody reacts differently because we know how contagious that is. If after 55 years of the war, a Carlo or an Okoro or an Eze is not freely and openly accepted everywhere and anywhere in the country, it is a trauma that we need to find a way to resolve.
Absolutely. And that will naturally take us to the next R, which is reconstruction. How much of reconstruction has happened in the old eastern region? And I know why I'm saying that, or better still, say eastern Nigeria. How much of reconstruction has happened in eastern Nigeria, at least to your knowledge? Do you think that the efforts have been realistic? Has the efforts been consistent? Has the efforts been genuine?
Well, I believe with a hindsight, the declaration was genuine, that the war should end, that we should reconstruct, that we should rehabilitate, and we should rebuild. But on a scale of 1 to 10, I will score Nigeria 4. Because don't forget, the 1970, there was so much money. 71, 72, up until 74, Nigeria was having a whole lot of inflow of money. That our then head of state even said that the problem of Nigeria isn't money, it is what to spend that money on. Okay, that was a wasted opportunity to fix the country and fix the Southeast and fix the rest of the nation. We lost it. Now, if in real terms we discuss infrastructures, investments, opportunities created in the Southeast by the federal government, I scored them 4. However, I will score 7 to Igbo themselves for their ability to not just rehabilitate physically, but mentally rehabilitate themselves. Because it takes a whole lot of willpower, a whole lot of strength and imagination to go through what we went through and still come out where we are today. It was a dark tunnel. It was a difficult situation. No matter how much you had, my parents had so much then, and several other families, all you get is 20 pounds. And that's where you have to start planning. For a group of people who lost the war to jump to where we are today means mentally we are strong, means if given a little bit more opportunity, we could do more, not just for ourselves, but for the rest of the country. So I score Nigeria 4 because Nigeria failed and continue to fail in the Igbo, not for want of effort. But I'll score the Igbo 7 on a scale of 1 to 10 because we've been able to go through all that we went through and we still find ourselves capable of developing not just our place, but developing practically everywhere we find ourselves in this country. I have always maintained in several conversations I've had over this matter, that if you're looking for true Nigerians, they will believe in Nigeria much more than Nigeria believes in itself. It wouldn't be to the advantage of Ndibo practically to see Nigeria disintegrate in a poof. If Nigeria ought to go their separate ways, it shouldn't go through any war anymore because it won't pay us. I'll tell you simply why. Africa is too small for our entrepreneurial abilities. So Nigeria is just a drop in the bucket. So we need the market space. We need the geographical space. However, we need Nigeria to recognize that if it took the rest of the country and the support of the big powers 3 years to bring us to the table to say you've lost, think of what we could bring to the table if you invite us and say, what can you give to Nigeria? Every country that went to every war that have been able to live through it and survive and become a great nation. Take Germany, take Japan. Let's not go too far. Have always come back to the drawing board and asked themselves the real bitter truth. All the rancors and all these shouts about divide Nigeria, break Nigeria down, is nothing more than to force Nigeria to say, let's have that bitter conversation. We've moved on. Let no mistake be made. We've really moved on. But the fact of it remains that we could be better than what we are today. The narrative in Nigeria has been negative narratives. We can change those narratives to positive narratives where we begin to say what led to what happened, what did we lose, and how can we fix it. It is not enough to make big speeches and come up with beautiful sounding words, rehabilitation, reconstruction, and all that. But the truth of the matter is that on the ground, there's nothing.
All right, so
55 years after,
okay.
Just one more point.
All right.
55 years after, we are still shouting up NEPA in a country that between 1970 and 74, we were looking for how to spend our money. Isn't that stupid?
I mean, that's a very big question, and that brings me to the third R. And you made instances with Germany and of Japan. But then coming back to Africa, there is also a country that went through some very bitter tribal turmoil, and that is Rwanda. The Rwandan genocide was one of the biggest conflicts that left that country in tatters. But it looks like Rwanda managed to rise from the ashes, if you like. So I guess the only attempt we've seen probably at really healing in that sense is when Oputa panel was set up. I think it was in the early days of former President Obasanjo's regime where people came and cried on national TV about how the military maltreated them and different things that happened. I'm sure you will have seen the viral video of Barrister Mobo, senior advocate of Nigeria, cross-examining a former soldier regarding the war. I'm sure you have seen that viral video as to why the war was categorized and made to look like it was a particular section of the country that masterminded it. But indeed, there were other surnames from other nationalities within the list. So the question is reunification. Are we ready to really reunify, as it were, if there was no unity before? You can look at the United States and say it's a very multicultural to really find a path. Is it so difficult for us to take advantage of our diversity at this point? Or is the war the problem?
Well, I think to answer your question, there are many layers to this challenge. But our great mind and great Igbo son said in his small book, The Trouble with Nigeria, that it is squarely a question of leadership. I think to some extent that is our problem. But the question is who would bail the cat? I find it very difficult looking at what we have been going through and what we are still going through to see where that Nigerian will come from. Who will see beyond the layers of his skin, the twist of his tongue, depending on what dialect or she belongs to, and think Nigeria. The other thing is that between you and me having this conversation, we really don't understand and know how big Nigeria is. We may Google and say Nigeria is so and so square kilometers, but that's not what I'm talking about. The sheer number of nationalities, of interests, of cultures, of traditions, of generational narratives that has formed our mindsets, they are almost nearly difficult to unhinge in a couple of years. So what are we talking about? Reunification. In private conversations, those who will come to public TVs and tell you, I believe in Nigeria, do not act as if there is really a Nigeria. So I am beginning more and more as I watch our relationships. If we have been together from 1960 till now, we have intermarried. We have shared a whole lot together. There are so many young girls from Igbo land that are married in the north. Many are married in the middle belt. Many are married in the southwest. Many are married in the south-south. And so are women from all these places married in the southeast. So usually, if marriage couldn't solve that problem, I start asking, what could solve it? So when you talk about reunifying Nigeria, I don't think the Nigeria of our dreams and our nostalgias is really going to be very possible anymore. So what we should be looking at is what Nigeria ought to have been, where we completely decentralize the center and take the power back to the regions. That way, each develops at its own pace. I equally am cognizant of the fact that we cannot just wake up in the morning and say there is no more Nigeria. It is quite impossible. Or going to be very difficult. But we can start slowly making the center unattractive. That way, development becomes local.
The question will be, how do we make the center unattractive, Chief Carol?
Yes, I was coming to your question about Oputa panel. I was smiling because I was there.
Okay.
And Mobo and Umade were the lead councils of Ohaneze.
That's right.
With Chukwumerije and the rest of them. Serving as our visual vocal voices. The man you have on camera, young as it was then, was the personal assistant of the then President, Justice Ozobu. And I was part of the back team that were more like doing the little we can in researching and providing the ammunitions that those you see visually and publicly were presenting. So I knew a little bit of how all this worked out. But today, the answers are all in the report of the Oputa panel, which there is still no official release of that report. So we are not bereft of how that can happen. All that has been thought through. We hurriedly copied what the South Africans did, because that was the basis of it. But we didn't know
the Truth and Reconciliation Committee in South Africa.
Yeah, but we didn't know ours was going to unearth some of the unimaginable things that came out. And it was good it came out. So I am urging Nigeria, irrespective of who is sitting in government, to publish that document, to bring it for debate and implement it. If we implement the Oputa panel as written, signed by Justice Chukwudifo Oputa and Bishop Kuka as secretary, I think we would get it right. Because all the other conversations that came, the other national conference and all the other petty pronaco and all that, they were all re-echoing what had already happened during the Oputa panel. So it is very possible. It is difficult mentally, you know that, I know that, for me to freely, feel free in Sokoto, in Maiduguri, in Kano, in Kaduna, in Kafanchan. And if the younger generation are listening, most of these places will sound like Greek to them. Because if you live in Enugu, your next spot is you go to Abuja or you come to Lagos or go to Port Harcourt or Calabar, and that's all. You come back home. The rest of the place are close to you. Not because you don't want to go see what these people are like. They are just like you and me. But because of the series of generational narratives that has made me an enemy to them, they simply cannot accept me the way I am. And this is the only blockade between whatever reunification we are talking about. We cannot sincerely be discussing reunification when there is this level of obstinacy coming from the center and coming from all sorts of political quarters who are not prepared to understand that as a nation, we are dying. As a nation, we are fast becoming a failed state, that we can do better than what we've been doing all these years. Simply what? Let those who want to continue the Nigerian story the way it is, let them shift aside and let Nigeria be redefined in such a way that it becomes useful for all of us. Because we need Nigeria to be able to function as one. But we don't need a Nigeria where I have a port in Calabar, of having a port in Azumini, And there was a port in all these places, and in Warri, and then these places, in a space of 10 years, between 1970 and 1980, up until probably 85, we closed it down, and everybody must go to Lagos. What kind of country is that? You're shooting yourself in the foot. It can't be one country when you run such policies.
All right. So we'll take a very quick break here, Chief Carlo Onoma. When we come back, we will zero in on Eastern Nigeria and how Eastern Nigeria can indeed redefine, reunify, reconstruct, and rehabilitate itself. This is the Eastern Eye. We'll be back after the break.
But why won't I be happy?
Opinion of the people matters.
Everything to your label.
Nobody wants to hear your voice if you don't have the money.
This is Obwe.
It's a brand new week and another opportunity for us to gist and me to tell you, bring all the spice, all the things that are hot, trending and exclusive on social media. Sometimes I know there's constructive criticism. I know that you know how to quote it. So for the people that don't understand, I want to be like, oh, why are you doing this?
Please, I'm not a cross-dresser. I'm only doing this because of the money on Facebook.
There are some people you need to just tell the truth brutally. Let it hurt them. Give it hot.
Afia TV official, exclusive every weekday on Afia TV.
You're welcome back to the Eastern Eye here on Afia TV. We're reaching you live from Enugu, Southeast Nigeria. My name is Alex Obodo, and I'm still here with Chief Carlo Onoma, giving us some very enlightening perspectives on 55 years after the Biafra War. How far have we fared? That's the question, and he's been providing some answers. But let's zero in now on Eastern Nigeria. Do you think that Eastern Nigeria has done enough? Earlier on, there was a rating you gave. You said you will give Eastern Nigeria or Southeast Nigeria 7/10. Some other people may not rate the region that much for different reasons. The argument being that a lot of the big punchers within the Southeast have their biggest investments outside of the region. Is this an indication that, well, there's been some kind of a loss of hope and trust and loyalty on what can grow and flourish within the eastern flanks? So what exactly is the problem? Just like we say, are the conditions not right? What is the problem?
Well, don't forget your question was the rehabilitation as proposed by the federal government. And the question was, has that actually happened? And I say from the federal government, in other words, from our collective purse, from our collective commonwealth, I will score Nigeria 4. But I will score Ndibo 7. Those who would disagree with my scoring would probably not have in Igbo with abject poverty, with homes ruined. Nsukka was a devastated place. A whole lot of Anambra were a sector, and several other places were destroyed. Fast track to 1980, we had rebuilt all these places. University of Nigeria and Nsukka had become a thriving place for education. People were coming from all over West Africa to go to school there. Enugu was picking up itself because between 1970 and 1980, I was in Enugu. I was an Enugu boy. So I could tell you that life was beginning and quietly coming back. Kenyatta Market, Ogbete Market, Coal Camp, were all beginning to have life spring back to them. Between Enugu and Aba was coming back. Trade and commerce, and Ariare Market, New Market, and several other markets were all beginning to come back to life. If we were waiting for the federal government, these things wouldn't happen. Same with Onitsha. And don't forget, Aba used to have people come all the way from Cameroon, all the way from the north, all the way from Mali to come and buy. Those were the times when Calabar Port was still working, when Port Harcourt Port was still working. And I recall as a young student then, we went on an excursion to NNPC Port Harcourt, and it was still working. So what am I saying in effect? All these things I'm narrating to you, there were no direct involvement of the federal government. The people, by sheer force of will, decided they wouldn't stop where life had dropped them. So, that was what I answered and the scale I gave. Your next line of questioning is a bit different about the volume of investment that Igbo have outside Igbo land compared to what we have in Igbo land today. Well, I could tell you that your question is more of, okay, how are we going to redefine Eastern Nigeria? That's what you're asking. We could do a lot, and a lot ought to be done. Most times when these conversations start, we say, oh, the governments of the Southeast or Eastern Nigeria are not doing enough. There is a limit to what these governments can do. The question is, what are we doing as a people? Igbo had never been known to be reliant on somebody else to solve problems. However, we have always believed in working as a team, in collaboration with others. So one of the first things I think we ought to begin to think about, that large-scale Akuruono scheme and conversation that is going on. It may not happen that way. I think we ought to begin to think about small, medium-sized enterprises. Inject money into them. Inject support into them by providing access to little capital. And going back to what we always do. In Abreba, we call it one tozo. The rest of the Igbos will call it Eba boy. But the person in our boy, who is your boy or one tozo, is practically learning from you. Is practically a mentee to you. So we need to bring back, in a more polished, civilized, and educated way, the mentorship program and create business incubation centers all over Igbo land. We are very, very rich in natural resources. Let nobody deceive you about that. We are potentially very strong in agriculture if we actually want to do that. So if we must reinvent ourselves, if we must begin to think about being self-sufficient, all this has to come into play. A lot of state governments in small little ways, are doing a whole lot to create opportunities like that. We need to meet them halfway with a handshake. Agriculture is a formidable place for us to go to. We cannot be reliant on food and poultry and all sorts of needs to come from elsewhere. We can develop, create unique techniques like has been done across the world.
All right.
The way the world is going,
That's
it's
right.
a lot more easier to learn and implement all those things.
Yes, we have about 5 minutes to go, and I want us to probably talk in a little more into the time left. And you cited the example of Germany and Japan. And one thing that stood out is that, well, they believe that they can develop their country, and they're doing so. Eastern Nigeria, often when people from here talk, they're saying that we can do this, we can do that. We are resilient, we are industrious, we don't give up. But then a lot of people believe that we are like a Category 4 hurricane that is still a tropical storm. So how do we get to the point where that storm gathers the speed, either off the Atlantic coast or it heads to the Pacific? What needs to happen for it to gain that speed? There is an adage I need to end with in the question. It looks like that Ebwe can affect Udene. Now, what would it take? What would it take for Ndibo to operate at their optimum speed?
Well, I may not be able to give you a one answer fits all, but I can point to things that are already happening, and we could use that to understand that these are possibilities. Take the story of the innocent in Newi. Take the story of the geometric in Aba. Take the story of Songhai, of Reverend Monsignor Nzamujo, which, rather than set it up here in the southeast or in Nigeria, it is functioning in Port Novo, in Republic of Benin. It is a modern agricultural and farming space that does a whole lot. He is a Catholic priest, and he is from Owerri. And his story, I will tell the much I know, will be the answer to your question. Nzamujo is a world-known professor of so many things. He had set up a world-class farm called the Songhai Farms. You must and may have heard about it.
Absolutely.
It is located in Port Novo. But his story, because I know him personally and we are quite close, his story is very simple. He came to the Southeast in the early 2000s, made that proposal and pitched that story to a few of our governors. I'm not going to call names. And they bought into it. But to cut the long story short, the same Igbos are very old people in government who have the opportunity to provide the land and provide basic infrastructure, nothing else. Turned around and started asking him for a kickback. And he took that away, tried another state, the same story. Tried another state, the same story. And he took it out. The first place he went to, because he was born and bred in the north, he speaks Hausa very fluently and Fulfulde very fluently. One state in the north, I'm not going to mention that state, bought into it, provided him with land. He set it up for them. It is functioning, and we in the southeast are heavily buying some produces from those states. But he finally left and went to Republic of Benin, next door. They gave him massive space. He set up the place. And I'll shock you again. The very same states in the southeast that rejected him.
Sends
Now
people for
go
training.
there.
Sends people for training.
Go
Isn't
there
it?
for training that never ends up working.
We are not going to call names, right?
Escapades. Yes. No names.
Songhai training. I remember that.
Go on excursion.
Yeah.
And go on excursion.
To Songhai farm.
The little story I've told you, the story I've told you is the story of what we must overcome to get this working. I know a lot of young men, some are living in Lagos, some abroad, whom I've had several conversations about, who are willing to pool resources together and come. They have made attempts in previous governments, prepared to pay and set up a whole lot of things with their partners abroad. They came here, spent a whole lot of money on PR, because that's the language they use when they take these monies from you. And they ended up frustrated and they went back. The things we go to India for, medical excursions and all that, the things we go elsewhere for, we can make it happen in Igbo land. But for that to happen, our mindset must change. Our securities must improve. Government policies must improve. A few states in the southeast are already providing basic infrastructures to allow these things to happen. And I can tell you for free, a whole lot of young men are going into agriculture. And they are doing that. Even if they are not still hitting the global indices, they are providing local support for families, for homes, when required, in basic things they can engage. So for the Southeast to change, we must change our mindset. We must take out this marginalization mindset. We are now self-marginalizing ourselves. Because if you consider the volume of money a whole lot of us are controlling, you'll be shocked what we have been able to do for the Southeast. So I'll say, in the little time that is left, that if you take the narrative of the Songhai, add it to the realities that we face about the inability to create a new set of Igbo leaders, old men continue to answer youths. Old men continue to occupy the spaces. Old men who are supposed to be at home, sad enough, many of them will not like it. When you retire, what business do you have in Abuja or in Kaduna or in Lagos? Your business should be in your community. If all these days, if you sit down, my brother, you were in that election, if 90% of those you saw, the high and mighty you saw in that hall, are living in the Southeast, don't you think they would have leveraged their names, their power, influences, to quell down on some of the excesses?
Absolutely. That's right.
We can't go beyond that.
We have to leave it at that, Chief Carlo Onuma.
Thank you very much.
This will be one of your many outings on the Eastern Eye. Chief Carlo Onuma is a historian, psychologist, and cultural curator. He's a whole lot of things, but today is not the day we will talk about it. He will have other outings on this program. Thank you for your very illuminating perspectives on the Eastern Eye tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. God bless you.
And that's the Eastern Eye for tonight. Up next is Nka with Jumai Bulama Ashebu. My name is Alex Owodo. Good night.
Time check is